You know when you're looking at a spreadsheet and you see a blank space? What's the first thing that comes to mind? Probably a mistake, right? An oversight? Well, what if I told you that empty cell isn't a glitch, but a clue? That it's actually a story just waiting to be told? I know, it sounds a little weird, but just think about it for a second. Those empty cells, those survey questions people skip, they can reveal just as much about our world as the numbers that are there. The absence itself carries meaning. Okay, so how do we actually do that? How do we start decoding what all those blank spaces are trying to tell us? Well, the very first step is learning to speak the language of absence. And it turns out, and this is the key thing, not all missing data is the same. There are three main types of missingness, and if you can understand them, you can unlock the story behind the silence. So first up, we've got the simplest type, missing completely at random, or MCAR for short. And yeah, it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. The reason a value is missing is just pure chance. It has absolutely nothing to do with the person, the situation, or the value itself. Think about this. A lab instrument just randomly glitches out and fails to record a few data points. There's no secret pattern, no hidden meaning, it's just bad luck. Now, this is the least problematic type of missing data you can have, but honestly, it's also pretty rare in the real world. All right, next up is something called missing at random, or MAR. Now, I gotta warn you, the name here is super misleading because it's not really random at all. What it really means is that the reason a value is missing can be explained by other information we already have. For example, let's say we're looking at a study and we notice that older patients are way more likely to miss their follow-up appointments. See? The missingness isn't random. It's tied to their age. But here's the kicker. Because we have their age, we can actually account for that pattern. The key is that the reason for the gap depends on data we have, not on the data we're missing. And that brings us to the final and honestly the trickiest one of all, missing not at random, or MNAR. This is where things get really interesting. With MNAR, the reason a data point is missing is directly tied to the value of that missing data point itself. The silence is practically screaming at you about what's being hidden. The classic example makes this crystal clear. Think about a survey that asks for your income. Who do you think is most likely to just skip that question? Oftentimes, it's people with very high incomes. The reason the data is missing, their high income, is the value itself. And that creates a huge systematic bias that's incredibly tough to fix. So this table here does a great job of laying it all out. As you move from left to right, from MCAR to MAR to MNR, you can see the problem gets way, way harder. We go from pure randomness, which is pretty easy to handle, to predictable patterns that need smarter methods, all the way to these really systematic biases that require specialized, careful approaches. Okay, so knowing why your data is missing is a huge part of the battle. But the next big question is, what are you going to do about it? And this is where you have to be super careful, because the most obvious fix is usually the one that creates the biggest mess. You've basically got two paths you can go down here. There's the easy path, with simple fixes, like just deleting any row with a blank space or plugging in the average value. But be warned, unless your data is MCAR, these methods can seriously distort your results. Then there's the better path, with advanced methods like multiple imputation. Instead of guessing one value, it creates several plausible replacements, which helps you keep the natural uncertainty of the data. It's more work for sure, but it really respects the complexity of the problem. Look, if there's one thing to really drill down on, it's this. You have got to match your method to your type of missingness. It's absolutely critical. If you take that income data we talked about, a clear MNAR case, and you treat it like it's just MAR, your analysis won't just be a little bit off. It could be completely fundamentally wrong. You know, all these technical fixes are super important, but they kind of point to something deeper, right? Let's zoom out for a second and think about what missing data really is. It's not just some statistical problem that needs to be solved. It's a philosophical question about what we measure and what gets left behind. This quote really just nails it. The pattern of what's not there, that's its own signal. It can tell you about sensitive questions on a survey, it can point out flaws in how you're collecting data, or it can even reveal bigger societal behaviors, like why people are reluctant to report their income. In other words, the absence itself is information. So this really leaves us with two different ways to see the whole problem. On one hand, you've got the objectivist view, which basically treats missing data as a technical bug that you need to fix with the right formula. But on the other hand, there's the constructivist view, which sees it as a clue, a sign that points to the human and system dynamics behind the data. A truly great analyst knows how to embrace both of these perspectives. Okay, so with all that in our heads, how do we actually handle this responsibly when we're in the real world, looking at real data? Let's boil it all down to a simple mental checklist that you can actually use. I want you to think of yourself as a data detective, and here's your 4-step guide. First, you diagnose the problem. Don't just delete, investigate why the data might be missing. Then you visualize it. Make charts, look for patterns, try to see the shape of the absence. From there, you choose your method carefully, and just as important, you tell people what you did and what assumptions you made. And finally, you test everything. Run a sensitivity analysis to see if your conclusions still hold up under different scenarios. And that brings us right back to where we started. Missing data, it's not a void. It's a clue. It reflects our systems, our behaviors, our choices. So the next time you see that empty cell, try not to see just a problem that needs to be fixed. See it as a question that's waiting to be asked. What story is this silence trying to tell me?